All right, thank you. It's somewhat ironic with the last name Stump, and I have a stump up here, so it's I feel at home in many ways. So here's the thing, actually. Every time I go to an event like this, I always say, what's the one word I want to hold as I'm experiencing this thing? And I was sitting up on the deck up there, and actually two words came to mind. The first word was gratitude. And gratitude from the perspective of there's this genius of place. I mean, Paul talked about it, but there's this incredible energy and vibration around this tent and this forest in general. And I'm humbled actually just to have the opportunity, and I want to thank Andy and David and Claire and all the other doers for what me truly is, and I do a lot of different things. It was like Christmas morning, like getting on the plane to come to this thing. So thank you very, very much for that. The other word that comes to mind for me is abundance. And as I sit and think about all the dialogues that are going to happen over the next few days and what's possible, it's like, wow, in a world where there's a ton of cynicism and voice of judgment and can'ts, I think it's just a beautiful thing where there's abundance of can'ts. And so before I jump into the journey, I actually want to share with you, because I kind of have a irreverent mind, kind of what inspires me in my thinking. And so I'll start young. So I have amazing parents. And I grew up with, literally and figuratively, a world without fences on a farm. They were high school teachers growing up. And it was great because, as my wife said, they really encouraged me to draw outside the lines. And I always have an incredible appreciation for that. And then as a kid, I had this one piece of paper, which I still have actually, and it sat above the desk in my room, and it was about a bumblebee. And it talked about how, aerodynamically speaking, the design of a bumblebee is a disaster. It's got a huge body and little wings, and yet it flies. And so it was this whole notion of, hey, the impossible is possible. So then fast forward a few years later, and I was at this prestigious prep school, and that was the one moment I said, I will never have a job that requires a coat and tie, ever. And I was at this school, and everyone was going to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford and Northwestern, and I flew to this school called University of Vermont, and I flew over the Green Mountains, and I saw Lake Champlain, and I said, man, I'm home. Like, this place is calling me. I need to be at this place. And then fast forward, in my first job, I was living in Sweden, and I came back to the States, and I joined Nike. And I joined Nike in this role called an Econ, and it's Nike spelled forwards and backwards. And it's an amazing, amazing role. And here's what I loved about it. So my boss was in Oregon, and she was my age, and I loved her to death. And I was in Los Angeles, and I went to 2 weeks of just this deep immersion around the brand, and then they threw me in the territory, and they said, hey, enhance the connection between this community and the brand. I mean, I was like, what? Like, I'm calling my friends, like, what are you doing? They're like, I'm sitting in the cube right now hating my boss. What are you doing? I said, I'm out creating stuff. I have no idea if it's going to, be successful or not, but they've given me the autonomy to play. And I always remember how empowered I was by having that space. And then a few years later, I came across this book called One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka, who was this Japanese farmer. And it was just this amazing story of this guy who unfortunately passed away. I think he was 95 in 2008. But while everyone else around him was harrowing, tilling, seeding, plowing, doing all these crazy things, working feverishly, he worked on the land a fraction of the time. And yet he had the most bountiful crops year after year. And he also didn't use machinery, fertilizer, or pesticides. And so he had mastered this art of do-nothing farming. And I was like, wow, like there's a learning there. And it was, to me, the learning was, how can I quiet my cleverness in a way that I can learn from that? And so in many ways, I tell you this story because it was like starting out with my parents just saying, hey, and that's what I loved about Nike. It was the power of ideas, where the allowance to create what you couldn't imagine, which I just found as an endorphin high. And then having the sense of autonomy going forward or in business, and seeing, God, what cultures need is not to be told what to do, but shared how to think and let them grow and let them play. So it was an amazing space. And so what I want to share with you today real quickly is this thing. And actually, I really appreciated David earlier mentioning the word soul. My premise is this. It's not about a green thing or a sustainable thing, because I think that actually doesn't come close to actually capturing the true essence of what we're talking about. I think what it is talking about a more meaningful and relevant, not thing, but relationship. And so this story is about bonfires with soul, which is about this new breed of brand and behavior that candidly is out there. In fact, in many ways, there's a revolution underfoot right now that we don't see in many ways, but it's happening. And so the key right now for me is just to ask that we do the following, is that let's quiet our cleverness a little bit, right? Let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what if we reframed, redesigned, and rethought, or rethink, reframe, redesign, the question of what green sustainability really means? And what if we went upstream to think about how our actions upstream would actually answer the questions downstream, right? Quickly about my background. So I live in New Hampshire, but we like to call it the Shire. It sounds far more eloquent and seductive. But there's 16 miles of coastline in New Hampshire. I have an amazing wife who's my best friend. I have two beautiful little girls. We live on a small farm. We're very much into community sustainable agriculture, or CSA farming. That's Caballito, the wonder dog, up there in the far right. We have a bunch of chickens, a rooster. If anyone wants a rooster, by the way, you can have it. The 4:30 wake-up calls are getting to be a bit much. But we lead a pretty simple life. I worked for about 16 years, almost 16 years at Nike. And my one big takeaway is this, is that we really can never underestimate the power of the human spirit. I mean, once again, there is this voice of cynicism, this voice of judgment that says, don't do, you can't do, no, you can't. And I saw it not in the pro athletes. I think the thing that inspired me most is the weekend warriors and the ability of people to actually do things in a way that you never thought possible. And then actually, just out of curiosity, how many people have heard of Seventh Generation? Actually, great. That's actually impressive. So Seventh Generation, I left Nike, right? So imagine a big billion-dollar giant, and I went to this company with just over 50 people and 50 million in revenue in Burlington, Vermont, so it was actually back home. And Seventh Generation actually makes environmentally healthy household products, right? So as my friends always said, hey, let me get this straight. You're going to leave Nike to go make laundry detergent and tampons. And I said, yep, that's what I'm going to do. But it was this amazing place, right? Because it really wasn't about selling any of these things. It was actually about pioneering a whole new world of corporate responsibility. In fact, Better World is actually identified in 2008, Seventh Generation, as the best company on the planet. And for me, it really kind of shaped and defined and informed how to hold this notion of how you can do well and do the right thing, and they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, there's a world of abundance when you do those things. And right now, I left Seventh Generation to take a year off, reconnect with my family. And it was during that time I really said, God, there's an amazing opportunity to ignite this in conversation around how we all could be doing the right thing and doing well. And so I created this company called Northstar Manifesto, which really is the function of looking at wonderful, bright, brilliant ideas in the space where humanity is a big part of their every deliberation, and really helping them become this bonfire. So I want to share with you 5 beliefs and 5 principles. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I think in the world we do that more than we need to, right? But I want to share with some simple things that you can take in on your own accord. Maybe it's one belief, maybe it's no beliefs. Maybe it's 5 principles, maybe it's 0 principles. But it all is there to help shape and inform how you think and what you do. I got to Seventh Generation, and it was the first company meeting that I was a part of, and I got up there and said, listen, here's the deal. I don't know anything about marketing or brand. And then I remember looking over and I saw, I think it was like the office manager was like, who the hell hired this guy? Because I thought that's what he was supposed to do. But I said, listen, here's what I do believe. I do believe in that the purpose of what we're here for is to optimize the resonance and relevance for those we serve. And that's how I hold this whole term of marketing. And I said in the second breath is, what's really going to make us great if we create a bonfire brand. A brand that actually people are drawn to, right? Where there's a conversation and they're partaking in your conversation. They're evangelists for your brand. They'll defend your brand. They're also your most ardent critics, which is a beautiful thing. When you can sit around a campfire with those you serve, and they can tell you everything that's great, everything that's not so great. And so instead of holding it as this thing kind of as a brand, but really hold it as a bonfire. And then the soul part is this notion of, as Barry Schwartz said at the TED conference last February, it's about time we put a little bit of moral jazz into our every thought, right? So why can't we have great companies, right? Why can't you care? Why can't you have purpose? Why can't you have meaning? In fact, the irony is, if you want to create effortless loyalty, create a company of values and meaning and watch what happens. You'll have people walking 3,000 miles barefoot, much like we did at 7th Generation, to be a part of that bonfire. So Bonfires with Soul is about, once again, this fervent belief around this new breed of brand behavior that's quickly emerging, not just in the States, by the way, but as a global phenomenon. This actually is a picture of Fukuoka, and I talked about him once again at One Straw, and I think the key thing is here, is having basically the courage to look at things through a different lens, right? I mean, so often we say, oh, we can't do that, or it's impossible. Fukuoka, man, you can't have bountiful crops. You're working half the time with no machinery, no fertilizers, no pesticides, and then we stop, right? But man, what if we actually observed in a way and we saw the true meaning and essence of things and we saw possibility? That's the whole key. I mean, right now in the sustainability movement, we're all, in many ways, it's kind of like the cows. Like hey, Jimmy's doing this, so let's do that, and we kind of move around in the herd. The best ideas have to be created. And so we need to allow glorious mistakes, but we need to look at things through a different lens. And then it's somewhat serendipitous. So as I just saw my lodging here, and it's a dome. I'm a huge, huge Bucky fan. I love Buckminster Fuller. Just to see a dome, I was like, oh my God, this is like, pinch me, I'm in heaven. But Bucky, it was incredibly complex, like the Da Vinci of our time, right? Philosopher, designer, teacher, high mileage autos in the 30s, the domes, world games. And if you've ever read his books, you know how complex it can be. But he had simple principles that we can extract, and one of which was this: widen the lens so that we can see the whole. So for a second, let's take away our intoxication with all things green and all things sustainable and ask ourselves, what is it we're really talking about? I mean, Bruce Sterling from the Viridian Design Movement said it best. He said, the issue isn't biodiversity or deforestation or climate change. The issue is our lack of appreciation for humanness. So imagine if we had humanity in our every deliberation. We didn't say let's be a green company or be a sustainable company, but just said, hey, let's actually consider humanity. I mean, 7th Generation, just as for those of you who don't know, actually comes from an Iroquois proverb, which is in our every deliberation, we need to consider the impact of the next 7 generations. Imagine if we all thought that way. It'd be pretty interesting, right? I have a friend who has a blog, and it is one blog post, and it's been up for 2 years. So in so many ways, I find that brilliant. That's doing more with less, by the way. And this whole notion of, in putting aside the catastrophic seafaring notion of of iceberg, the whole notion is, so often in life we see the little tip of something, and then we're like, it's nothing. But really, what's below? Abundance, right? Think of this conference. I mean, think about the cojones of the team that put this together to say, hey, God, what if we got a bunch of people to assemble somewhere in Wales and brought all the people from around this global community to participate in this conversation? I bet you a lot of people would be like, you know what, you're nuts, right? People said the same thing about Pixar. People said the same thing about Apple. someone said it earlier about, actually Paul just said it about believing. If you really believe in something, man, like if you see the tip of an iceberg, the tip of something, and you sense there's abundance below, then man, go after it. Because that's the difference between living ordinary and extraordinary, right? Is the aiming for the icebergs. I have a wonderful friend who's incredibly well revered in the global world, and he says, "Hey, youth is apathetic," and I have to say, I got into a big argument with him, and I was like, "Wow, Generation We or millennials, those born between '76 and '96," I said, "Ask yourself this. Put yourself in their shoes." I think empathy is an amazing word that we should often kind of absorb and learn and understand and appreciate on a daily basis. But imagine if you're a part of this generation and you've seen financial collapse, credit crisis, climate crisis, energy crisis. You've seen, in the States, for example, you've seen a less than scintillating 8 years. You've seen a couple world wars, right? You've seen your two parents working their asses off, greater wealth, but guess what? Not as happy. In fact, two parents working their asses off, probably divorced. So then you ask yourself, God, if you were that youth, would you want to dive into the world today, or would you want to create your own space? And so in many ways, when we talk about the Bonfire, what I talk to many companies about is, listen to this group. They're not like us, you know? God, I was an economics major, for Christ's sakes, you know? I have no idea. I did terrible at it, but I have no idea why I took that major other than Wall Street was cool back in the 80s. But this group is amazing. Social equity and justice, environmental stewardship, those are core tenets. They're part of the collaboration nation. There is no I, there's more we, right? You know, they basically flip the bird to the man saying, hey, I am not going to be a part of that picture. I will create my own picture. I'm very entrepreneurial. And technology is their best friend. So imagine if you could actually tap in and inspire that energy ball, right? Imagine it. Imagine if actually youth, and I've seen it at 7th generation where part of that generation came to work for us, and I have to say on a daily basis, it inspired me. And so I think as we kind of build things forward and you say, God, what's going to fuel the bonfire? Youth. I mean, youth is amazing, and it's youth globally. It's not just, certainly not in the States. I mean, I was just in New Zealand. It was just fascinating to hear youth talk about things in a way that were like, please, if we could just have this platform to create, wonderful things would happen. So 5 principles. Very simple. Great brands have great cultures. A place where human capital is your best capital. Right? I mean, what does it take? It takes having a Northstar. It takes Ray Anderson from Interface Carpet saying, we're at ground zero, and by 2020, we're going to climb this mountain called Mount Sustainability. And so the culture there is saying in the first breath, holy shit, could we do that? And then the next breath said, imagine if we did do that. Right? It takes creating a learning organization where you're cultivating and nurturing people and not putting people in hierarchies. Right? And most importantly, as it relates to bonfires with soul, it's if you have a company of meaning, of value, you have created effortless loyalty. Quick little microcosm. In my town, there's a pizza shop. It's called Flatbread Pizza. It makes organic pizza with an oven, locally sourced from around different places. It's been open 5 years. It's the same staff to the T. Host, hostess, manager, bartender, waitresses, right? They're not getting rich there. I guarantee it. But it's a place that has meaning to them. Our CSA farm where I belong to, there is an abundance of new farmers in the U.S. right now. And I asked them, why in God's name do you want to be a farmer? You've just got, our farmer just graduated from Cornell, which is an amazing institution. And she said, I want to give back to the community. I want to be a part of this farm. I want to be a part of land. Meaningful, value-based companies, Northstars, there's a myriad of things. But before you go out and save the world as a brand or as a company, start inside. Ignite the bonfire inside first, and then go outside. Great brands, once again, have great cultures. We've all heard this conversation before. around when it comes to green and sustainability. If we don't do X, then X will happen, right? You're like, you do it out of fear. We have to do something, otherwise Greenpeace is going to knock on our door, which we've all seen the devastation of Greenpeace and what they can do. So that's how you play. It's kind of like in sports. You can play to win, or you play not to lose. Those are two different behaviors. So on the inspiration side, there's a couple amazing examples for me. The first actually is Nike, which is close to me, which is this. Nike, and when it first got into sustainability, it was really a slow process. It really wasn't catching fire. And then the group took a step back and said, listen, what are we great at? We're great at performance innovation, right? So why not just inject that conversation into performance innovation so that it becomes part of our genetic code? IBM, when they first got into this thing, like big green ideas, right? What does that mean? Big green ideas. And then they had the foresight to take a step back and said, listen, who are we? We're a company that makes advanced technical solutions. What does the world need? God, the world needs to be more efficient. If the US grid was 5% more efficient, 5%, that'd be akin to 53 million cars coming off the roads. 5%. Imagine the efficiency of traffic, healthcare, food, how we source food. A carrot goes over 1,700 miles to get to most people's mouths in the US. And you can make carrots in your backyard. My point is, they held the conversation, they shifted from big green ideas, which once again doesn't mean much, to a place of inspiration, which is who are we, what are we gifted at, and how we can take the global needs, the inherent needs out there, food, water, land, poverty, energy, climate, and bring them into our conversation. And when you can do it from a place of inspiration, it ignites your culture, and it actually gives you the far better benefits. So once again, holding the conversation from inspiration versus desperation. See, feel, change. We just need to become master storytellers. There's John Carter from Harvard wrote a book on behavioral change. If people can see something, they'll feel it and they'll change. Right? We don't need to bore them. I think lightness of touch was something David had talked about earlier. What if we could inspire people through conversation? So I'm going to actually share with you a quick piece on the art of storytelling. quickly on that. So that issue is obviously about impoverished girls in third world countries, and just the power of education. Seems like a daunting subject. Generated over $100 million in support. And at the Davos Economic Forum, actually, the girl effect as a conversation has been a part of the agenda. Once again, creating something you couldn't imagine. Last two principles to wrap up. Paul talked about it. Man, I have had the gift of working with biomimicry and Janine Benyos. And I can tell you it's the most amazing thing. So a lot of times we think we're creating cool stuff and designing cool stuff. As Janine says, imagine designing spring. That makes what we're doing somewhat seem minimal, right? So why not take a leader and influence as a mentor from nature for 4 billion years that has been creating this regenerative life? There's so much to learn. And life's principles are embedded within nature. Optimize versus maximize. What would it mean to optimize profit versus maximize? What would it mean to optimize someone's time versus maximize? What would it mean to optimize resources versus maximize? Nature builds from the bottom up. Ray Anderson did his whole mission around sustainability, one mind at a time. Not a 30,000-foot TV ad to get it done, one mind at a time. David's talking about how Howie's needs to do that same thing, right? Nature as a mentor. And by the way, if you go to asknature.org, which is a free portal, you can actually become part of this incredible natural community and learning how nature can be your mentor, model, and measure. And the last thing I want to say to close is this. This whole movement is about trust. It's about a relationship. It's no different than any other relationship you have. Trust is everything. People don't want perfection. They really don't. They want honesty, right? I mean, that's all they want. At Seventh Generation, we messed up a lot of times, and we were honest, and I swear to God, the nation, the seventh generation nation, our evangelists grew. We just have to have honest dialogues, not perfect dialogues. And that's the key of this discussion. Just a real quick example. Actually, Patagonia does an amazing job with the Footprint Chronicles, which actually shows how a piece is made, where it's made, shows you everything. And the cool thing is it says, here's the good thing about it. Oh, by the way, here's the bad part, the part we need to work on. Incredible. Once again, honesty versus perfection.